Eleanor Whitmore stood in the softly lit nursery, one hand resting gently on her growing belly as she admired the delicate wallpaper she had chosen herself, tiny watercolor animals dancing through forests. 6 months pregnant and glowing, she radiated calm elegance, the kind of poise that came naturally to someone raised in quiet privilege and then thrust into the spotlight as the wife of Damien Rothwell, one of London's most powerful billionaires. Their marriage, chronicled in magazines and envied by socialites, seemed flawless to the world, fairy tale-like in its romance, stability, and effortless glamour. To everyone watching, Eleanor had it all: a devoted husband, a child on the way, and a future filled with promise. She smiled softly as she zipped up the garment bag containing Damien's tuxedo. The next evening, he would be hosting one of the biggest business events of his career, a private investor gala for Rothwell Industries, held at a private Mayfair estate. Eleanor had spent weeks quietly planning a surprise for him, a heartfelt speech, a custom-designed gift, even a discreet video tribute showcasing his achievements. It was her way of showing how proud she was, of reminding him that no matter how demanding the business world became, he had a home filled with love waiting for him. She believed that perhaps the distance she'd been feeling lately, the coldness in his late-night arrivals, the absent gaze during conversations, would vanish once he saw how much she cared. But several floors below, in Damien's sleek home office, the atmosphere was different. The room, draped in deep walnut and steel, buzzed quietly with tension. Damien sat behind his desk, his jaw tight as he read yet another message on his private phone, one he never left in plain sight. His hand shook slightly, and he downed a sip of scotch, eyes flickering toward the fireplace but seeing nothing. The message was short, urgent, and unsigned. It read, "She knows. Handle it before the gala." He locked the phone away in the drawer and rubbed his temples. His wife was upstairs, preparing to celebrate him. His unborn child was growing. And yet, beneath the surface of his carefully constructed empire, something poisonous had taken root. Something tied not just to a secret affair, but to someone Eleanor once loved deeply. Someone she never expected to betray her. Her own younger sister. The storm was coming, and none of them were ready. Eleanor's mornings began with the hush of classical music echoing through the halls of their Kensington townhouse and the scent of chamomile tea drifting from the kitchen. Once a respected art curator known for her eye for rare European Impressionist pieces, Eleanor had stepped away from the gallery world when she married Damien Rothwell. At first, the shift felt natural, an extension of the fairy tale she had always imagined. Their whirlwind courtship had been filled with rooftop dinners, trips to the Amalfi Coast, and whispered promises about building a life together. Damien had assured her she didn't need to work anymore, that she deserved peace, rest, and the freedom to focus on their growing family. It was hard to argue with that kind of devotion, and even harder when she found out she was pregnant only a few months into their marriage. But as the weeks turned into months, and the baby began to show itself in the curve of her belly and the tenderness in her back, Eleanor started to notice the silence in their home growing louder. Damien no longer lingered over breakfast, no longer touched her without flinching like he used to. He came home late, often distracted, claiming work pressures as the reason. She tried to believe him, because she had to. Because if she let her mind wander too far, it landed in a place of suspicion she wasn't ready to face. She filled her days with nesting projects, rearranging the nursery, meeting with interior designers, flipping through parenting books, and pretending that everything was still perfect. But something inside her had begun to shift, a quiet realization that what they once shared was slipping away, and she didn't know why. Then came the moment that unspooled everything. While checking the finalized guest list for Damien's upcoming gala, just a routine glance to ensure the florist had spelled everyone's names correctly, Eleanor's eyes landed on a name that nearly stopped her heart. Chloe Whitmore. Her sister. The sister she hadn't spoken to in 5 years. The sister who had disappeared from her life after an explosive argument that neither of them had dared to revisit. The name was neatly printed on the RSVP, no title, no +1. Just there, among all the investors and executives, as if it belonged. Eleanor stared at it for several minutes, her heart pounding in her ears. Chloe was supposed to be in France, or maybe Italy. Somewhere far away, chasing some chaotic dream of adventure, the kind that had always lured her since they were teenagers. She hadn't answered Eleanor's messages in years, hadn't been at the wedding, hadn't reached out after learning she was pregnant. Eleanor had convinced herself that Chloe wanted nothing more to do with her. But now, somehow, she was coming to Damien's private investor gala. The questions rolled in like waves. Why was Chloe on the list? Had Damien invited her? Was it a coincidence? Surely Damien knew how complicated their relationship had been. He had heard the story, the way Chloe had broken Eleanor's trust, the betrayal that had driven them apart. Eleanor could still remember the last time she saw her sister's face, tear-streaked and defiant, as she slammed the door and left their parents' house behind. That fracture had never healed. And yet here she was, about to walk through the front doors of their life again. Eleanor closed the laptop, her hands trembling. Her breath caught somewhere between confusion and fear. The name on the list felt like a whisper from the past, one that threatened to unravel the fragile illusion of happiness she had been desperately trying to hold together. Something was wrong. Something far deeper than Damien's coldness, deeper than Chloe's return. It was the feeling that the storm she'd been sensing wasn't just coming, it was already here. Damien Rothwell stared out of the glass wall of his 35th floor office, his reflection superimposed over the London skyline. Sharp-suited and immaculately groomed, he looked every inch the titan of industry he was known to be. CEO of Rothwell Industries, a cutting-edge tech conglomerate that had grown from a mid-tier software startup into a multi-billion-pound empire under his command, Damien had built his reputation on decisiveness, vision, and a willingness to take risks no one else dared to consider. He was sleek, calculated, and merciless in the boardroom, traits that had earned him both admiration and fear from his competitors. But today, behind the facade of cool authority, something churned within him. The upcoming investor gala wasn't just another quarterly meet and greet, it was the turning point. The deal he was about to present could shift the company's trajectory globally, opening doors to partnerships in Silicon Valley and Asia. If it succeeded, it would secure Rothwell Industries as a permanent fixture in the future of AI development. If it failed, everything could unravel. Behind his calm exterior, Damien was barely holding it together. The pressure mounted with every hour, finalizing presentations, smoothing investor egos, arranging security. He needed to be flawless. He couldn't afford distractions. But one existed already, one that pulsed beneath the surface of his controlled life like a ticking bomb. A secret that began with temptation and had spiraled into something dangerous, reckless, and addictive. Her name was Chloe. Young, intoxicating, and disarmingly familiar. Their connection had started innocently enough. She'd shown up at one of his company's charity events, introduced as a friend of a consultant. She hadn't used her last name. He hadn't asked. But the chemistry was instant, undeniable. She was everything Eleanor wasn't, spontaneous, wild, uninhibited. For months, he told himself it was a fling, a coping mechanism for the distance that had crept into his marriage. But it had gone too far. He was seeing her regularly now, slipping out of boardrooms to meet her in hidden apartments, sending her expensive gifts under aliases, shielding her from public eyes. Damien had risked everything for her, and he knew it. The irony was cruel. He had married Eleanor for her grace, her elegance, the calm she brought into his chaotic world. But Chloe had ignited something raw in him, something dangerously alive. He couldn't stop, even when he knew the cost. And now, with the gala only days away, Chloe had pushed for something unthinkable. She wanted to come. Not just as a shadow or secret, but as a guest, on the official list. She said she wanted to support him. That she was tired of being hidden. Damien had hesitated, but he relented, telling himself that if she kept a low profile, no one would notice. Eleanor certainly wouldn't. She wouldn't recognize her estranged sister in the sea of investors, not after 5 years of silence. At least, that's what he hoped. What Damien didn't realize was that the very night he intended to solidify his legacy would be the night everything collapsed. The woman he betrayed was piecing it all together. The affair he thought was his own sin to manage had a far more devastating truth tied to it. A truth he'd never anticipated. He returned to his desk and opened the folder with the finalized investor packet, but the numbers blurred in front of his eyes. The guilt clawed at him, but he buried it again. Just a few more days, he told himself. Then he'd figure out a way to end it cleanly, with minimal damage. What he didn't know was that damage control was already impossible. Eleanor was watching. The stone was closer than he thought. And when it arrived, it would come for him with the full force of everything he'd underestimated: love, betrayal, and blood. The first clue had come from a seemingly innocent place, a receipt tucked inside Damien's coat pocket. It was for an expensive necklace from a boutique Eleanor had never visited. At first, she brushed it off, assuming it was a gift for her that he hadn't yet given. But when her birthday came and went with no mention of jewelry, a knot began to form in her stomach. She didn't want to become the kind of woman who checked her husband's pockets or scrolled through his emails, but the silence in their marriage had become deafening. That silence began to speak in whispers, and Eleanor could no longer ignore them. She called Lydia, her oldest friend and one of the few people who had stood by her after her estrangement from Chloe. Lydia listened patiently, then carefully asked the question Eleanor had been avoiding: "Are you sure he's not hiding something, or someone?" Together, they began connecting the dots. Lydia, ever resourceful, discreetly reached out to someone in Rothwell Industries' logistics department and obtained hotel booking records tied to Damien's business card, several rooms, all under aliases, but always the same woman checking in. Eleanor followed the trail further, digging into gift deliveries, secret appointments logged in his personal calendar, and even a photo Lydia found through a private investigator friend. When Eleanor saw it, her breath caught in her throat. It was Chloe, laughing, arm in arm with Damien outside a luxury hotel in Knightsbridge. Her younger sister. The woman she hadn't seen in 5 years. The final piece slid into place, and everything collapsed inside her. Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't scream. Something colder than grief settled in her: clarity. She realized the betrayal was bigger than infidelity. It was a collision of blood and love, of trust shattered from both ends. But she wouldn't confront them in secret. No, they had chosen to humiliate her in the shadows, so she would bring it into the light. With Lydia's help, she crafted a plan. Damien's investor gala was the perfect stage. All eyes would be on him: the press, the partners, the elite of London. Eleanor would walk in, pregnant, proud, and uninvited, and she would tell the truth. She would let the world see what they had done. Not just Damien. But Chloe, too. She wouldn't whisper her pain. She would speak it where it could never be ignored again. The ballroom of the Halston Regency glimmered beneath a cascade of crystal chandeliers, each one refracting light onto the polished marble floors like diamonds scattered across a lake. London's elite had gathered in tailored tuxedos and couture gowns, sipping champagne and murmuring about market projections and Rothwell Industries' next big move. Waiters moved like shadows, balancing silver trays of hors d'oeuvres and vintage wine, while a string quartet played softly in the background, setting the tone for a night meant to impress and seal Damien Rothwell's dominance in the tech sector. The tension was electric but masked beneath the curated glamour. Tonight was not just a party, but a declaration. Damien stood at the center of it all, sleek in a tailored black suit, his hair perfectly styled, his expression calm yet focused. As he stepped up to the stage, the music faded, and a hushed reverence swept over the room. This was his arena. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the Rothwell Industries logo, sleek and powerful. He began to speak, his voice rich and commanding, laying out his vision for the company's future: a bold AI initiative, global expansion, revolutionary medical software. The audience was captivated: captains of industry, venture capitalists, tech influencers, all hanging on his every word. But just as Damien transitioned to the core of his presentation, the double doors at the back of the ballroom opened with a gentle but unmistakable creak. A ripple passed through the crowd as heads turned. Standing in the doorway, framed by golden light from the hall, was Eleanor Rothwell. She was radiant, not in the soft, polished way society expected, but in a way that made everything else in the room seem artificial. She wore a sleek, floor-length ivory dress that clung to her 6 months pregnant figure with quiet defiance. Her shoulders were squared, her chin lifted, and her eyes, sharp, unflinching, scanned the crowd before settling on Damien. Damien's voice faltered. The mic in his hand wavered slightly. A few whispers turned into a murmur, then into confused chatter. His investors exchanged glances. He stepped forward, as if to stop her, but she was already walking down the aisle between the round banquet tables, her heels clicking against the marble like gunshots in the silence. She reached the stage without breaking stride. One of the event coordinators moved toward her, uncertain, but she held up a hand and took the mic directly from Damien's stunned grasp. For a moment, she simply looked out at the crowd, letting the silence settle over them, letting the tension stretch taut. Her voice, when it came, was calm and even, but it cut through the room like glass. "I'm Eleanor Rothwell," she said, her gaze sweeping across the sea of stunned faces. "The mother of Damien's unborn child. And the sister of his mistress." A collective gasp surged through the ballroom. Champagne flutes were set down. One man actually choked on his wine. Cameras, previously poised to capture moments of business triumph, flashed rapidly, capturing this moment of personal catastrophe in real time. Damien stood frozen, pale, his mouth slightly open, unable to speak. Then, from the crowd, another figure emerged. A slim brunette in a slinky navy gown, her skin flushed and her lips trembling. Chloe. She stepped out into view, her eyes locked on Eleanor's, horror spreading across her face like a slow-moving fire. She hadn't expected this. She had come to bask in Damien's spotlight from the shadows, not to be dragged into the center of it. Her mouth opened as if to protest, to explain, but no words came. Eleanor didn't look at her. She kept her eyes forward, addressing the room. "I came here tonight not to ruin a business deal," she said, "but to reclaim my voice. I've been silent for months, ignored, betrayed, lied to. My husband, whom you've trusted with your money, your partnerships, your futures, has been betraying the most sacred partnership of all. And not just with anyone. With my sister." A silence deeper than before followed. A few of the investors stood, unsure whether to leave or wait for damage control. Others simply stared, stunned into stillness. Damien reached out to her, whether to pull her away or plead with her was unclear, but she stepped back before he could touch her. "I won't be silenced," she said, lowering the mic. "Not anymore." Then, with all the dignity of a queen descending from her throne, Eleanor turned and walked off the stage, leaving Damien, Chloe, and an empire in freefall behind her. 5 years earlier, the Whitmore household had fallen apart in slow, painful fragments. Their parents' marriage, once the envy of the neighborhood, had unraveled beneath the weight of hidden resentment, financial tension, and long-buried secrets. Eleanor, the eldest daughter, had held herself together with grace, stepping into the role of emotional caretaker for everyone around her. Chloe, on the other hand, reacted with chaos. She rebelled, disappearing for nights at a time, changing friends, skipping university classes, and flirting with self-destruction. The divorce had sent her spiraling, and while Eleanor did her best to pull her back from the edge, Chloe seemed determined to fall. Back then, Eleanor had just ended a long-term relationship with a man named Simon, thoughtful, ambitious, and someone she once believed she'd marry. The breakup had been quiet but devastating, mostly due to growing apart rather than any real wrongdoing. Eleanor, ever private, hadn't shared the details with many people, just her closest friends and, reluctantly, her sister. She remembered sitting on the edge of Chloe's bed, tearfully explaining how Simon had started making her feel invisible, like she was just an accessory to his life plans. Chloe had hugged her, promised her support. Promised she'd never let Eleanor be hurt like that again. But weeks later, Eleanor walked into a downtown cafe and found them together, Chloe and Simon. Not just sitting or talking, but laughing, leaning close, their hands brushing in a way that made Eleanor's stomach twist. At first, she told herself it was nothing, that maybe Chloe had reached out to him, trying to fix things for her. But the truth came out soon enough. They were seeing each other. They had been for some time. When confronted, Chloe didn't deny it. She didn't even look ashamed. She shrugged and said, "You left him. Why shouldn't I have a chance?" That betrayal burned through Eleanor like acid. It wasn't just the loss of Simon, it was the revelation that her sister, the person who should have protected her heart the most, had broken it with surgical precision. The fight that followed was ugly, full of shouted accusations, tears, and the kind of silence that only exists between two people who know each other too well. Chloe left that night and didn't come back. In the years that followed, they had no contact. Eleanor blocked her number. Chloe didn't try to reach out. The bond that had once defined their childhood, summers in the garden, whispered secrets under shared blankets, was severed beyond repair. What Eleanor didn't realize back then, but understood far too clearly now, was that Chloe had always wanted her life. Not out of admiration, but envy. Eleanor was the golden child, the one who did everything right, who got the praise, the attention, the stability. Chloe had lived in her shadow, resenting the comparisons, the expectations, the fact that no matter how hard she tried to be different, Eleanor always seemed to come out on top. Taking Simon hadn't just been about attraction, it was about revenge. About proving she could take something from the perfect sister. And that same dark hunger, that need to possess what wasn't hers, explained why she had chosen Damien. It wasn't just about power or status. It was about Eleanor. About stealing from her again. About stepping into her world, her marriage, her future, and seeing if this time, she could actually take it all. The silence that followed Eleanor's final words felt louder than any explosion. As she descended the stage, heels clicking against the marble with defiant elegance, the room remained frozen, hundreds of powerful men and women too stunned to speak, drink, or even breathe. Damien stood rooted in place, still clutching the mic he no longer controlled, his face drained of color. The shimmering illusion of confidence he had worn so effortlessly only moments ago now hung off him like a costume torn at the seams. The first tremor hit within minutes. A senior investor, Lord Harrington, slipped quietly toward the exit, his phone already pressed to his ear. Others soon followed, murmuring behind hands, shaking their heads, calculating how this scandal might taint their portfolios. One of Damien's most crucial tech partners whispered something to his assistant and left without even pretending to offer a polite goodbye. The collapse had begun, not with shouts or threats, but with the quiet horror of reputations unraveling. His empire, built on poise, precision, and perception, was beginning to rot from the inside out. Damien forced himself off the stage and moved through the stunned crowd, calling Eleanor's name. "Eleanor, please, just give me a minute," he said, reaching her as she neared the double doors. She turned to face him, her face unreadable, her eyes glossy but dry. "Just, please," he begged again, lowering his voice as the cameras pivoted toward them. "We can talk about this. Privately. I'll explain." But Eleanor stood tall, her voice steady and controlled. "I gave you months to explain, Damien. I gave you space. Trust. A child. And you gave everything to someone else. There's nothing left to say." With that, she turned and walked away, her hand gently resting on her belly, the symbol of what she carried, not just life, but her dignity. A second figure darted forward, Chloe, her face pale, frantic. "Eleanor, wait, please," she called out, but Eleanor didn't slow. Chloe tried again, weaving through tables, ignoring the judgmental stares now piercing her from all angles. But Eleanor didn't even glance back. The doors opened, and then she was gone, swallowed by the corridor beyond. Back in the ballroom, Damien stood alone under the harsh glare of the stage lights. The music had stopped. The champagne had gone flat. And his investors, those who hadn't already left, were no longer discussing business, only scandal. Murmurs of resignation, of lawsuits, of contingency plans floated through the air like vultures circling a corpse. Damien realized, perhaps for the first time in his charmed career, that power could disappear faster than it was earned. He had climbed to the top with ruthless precision, but all it took was one woman's truth, spoken aloud, to bring the whole tower down. The night air outside the Halston Regency was crisp, laced with the distant sound of traffic and the soft hum of generators behind the event hall. Eleanor walked swiftly across the dimly lit parking lot, her hands trembling though her face remained composed. The adrenaline of the moment was wearing off, leaving behind exhaustion and a hollow ache in her chest. Her baby kicked gently, like a reminder that she wasn't alone, that she still had something to fight for. "Eleanor." Chloe's voice rang out behind her, sharp and breathless. "Please, wait." Eleanor stopped but didn't turn around. Her breath fogged the cold air in front of her, the tension settling between them like a heavy fog. Footsteps crunched against gravel as Chloe approached. When Eleanor finally turned to face her, her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. "You have 2 minutes," Eleanor said coldly. Chloe came to a halt, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was bracing against a wind only she could feel. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." Eleanor scoffed. "You mean you didn't mean for me to find out? Or for everyone to find out? That's what you regret, isn't it?" Chloe's face crumpled slightly. I wanted to matter. I wanted someone to see me." Eleanor's voice sharpened. "You were my sister, Chloe. I loved you. I protected you when Mom and Dad tore each other apart. I gave you everything I could, and you threw it back in my face, for the second time." Chloe stepped closer, tears spilling now. "You always had the perfect life, Eleanor. You were always the one people loved, the one who made our parents proud, the one who never made mistakes. I didn't want Damien for his money or his name. I just wanted to feel like someone chose me for once. Even if it meant being hated. Even if it meant stealing from you." The words hit Eleanor like a slap, raw, pathetic, honest. She stared at her sister, heart cracking not just from betrayal but from the unbearable realization that Chloe had always been broken in ways Eleanor couldn't fix. "I would have shared my world with you," Eleanor said, her voice quieter now. "But you didn't want to be part of it. You wanted to destroy it." Chloe choked on a sob. "I'm sorry." But Eleanor shook her head. "No. Sorry doesn't undo the damage. And I won't carry your guilt on top of everything else." She looked down at her stomach, then back at Chloe. "I choose my child. My peace. My future. You don't belong in it." And with that, she turned and walked away, no longer chasing revenge, no longer begging for apologies. Just choosing herself. And this time, it was enough. Back at Rothwell Industries headquarters, the atmosphere was thick with tension and panic. The sleek glass walls that usually reflected confidence now seemed to trap the heavy weight of impending disaster. Damien paced the length of his office, phone pressed to his ear as his communications team scrambled to contain the fallout. Reporters had already caught wind of the gala scandal, and social media buzzed with speculation and outrage. News outlets ran headlines that shredded his carefully curated image, painting him as a deceitful husband and a reckless businessman. Investors were calling, demanding answers, threatening to pull their funding. The stock price was already plummeting, dropping sharply with every negative headline. His executive team gathered around the conference table, faces pale and tense. His chief operating officer, Mark, spoke quietly but firmly. "Damien, we need to issue a public apology." A well-crafted statement acknowledging the situation, expressing remorse. "It's the only way to stop the hemorrhaging." Damien shook his head, anger and pride flickering across his features. "No. This is a personal matter. It has nothing to do with the company. We can't let the media dictate our narrative." Mark's eyes hardened. "It already has. Investors are worried about stability. Our partners are questioning our leadership. If we don't act fast, the damage will be irreparable." Damien clenched his fists, the tension coiling inside him like a spring ready to snap. He wanted to fight. To deny. To control the story on his terms. But beneath his bravado, a deeper fear gnawed at him, not for the company's future, but for Eleanor's. He thought back to their early days, the quiet dinners, the stolen moments before the world demanded everything else from them. The way she had looked at him with trust and love, the way she had believed in him unconditionally. He had betrayed that trust. Not just with business, but with her heart. The realization hit harder than any stock drop or media scandal. Taking a deep breath, Damien finally relented. "Prepare a statement," he said quietly. "But make it honest. No corporate doublespeak. This is my fault." His team nodded, relieved. As he sat back down, Damien stared out over the city skyline, feeling the weight of what he was losing, not just a company, but the woman he had once truly loved, the family he had promised to protect. And for the first time, he understood that some losses couldn't be fixed with apologies or press releases. Under the glaring lights of a hastily arranged press conference, Damien Rothwell stood at the podium, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a visible weariness that etched lines deeper into his face. Cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing every twitch of his jaw and every flicker of his eyes as the room fell into expectant silence. The media frenzy surrounding the scandal had reached a fever pitch, and Damien knew that a public statement was inevitable. But this was more than just damage control. It was a moment of reckoning, a crossroads where he had to choose between clinging to power or accepting responsibility. He cleared his throat, searching for the words that could somehow mend the fractures he had caused, though deep down he knew that some things were beyond repair. "Today," he began, voice steady but low, "I am stepping down as CEO of Rothwell Industries." The words hung heavy in the air. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing the gravity of the moment. "I have made grave mistakes," Damien continued, "not only as a leader entrusted with the future of this company but as a husband and soon-to-be father. I betrayed my wife, my values, and my unborn child. I do not deserve forgiveness." His eyes flickered toward the rows of reporters, but beyond them, he imagined Eleanor, her strength, her pain, and the life growing inside her. "But I owe them the truth." The confession was raw and unfiltered, a stark departure from the polished statements corporate leaders often delivered. Damien admitted to the affair, the betrayal, and the personal failures that had shattered his family. He acknowledged the damage done to Rothwell Industries' reputation and promised to cooperate fully with the board and investors during the transition period. He expressed a deep remorse that seemed genuine, a rare vulnerability that caught many off guard. Reactions were mixed. Some investors expressed disappointment and anger, questioning whether the company could recover from such a public scandal. Industry insiders speculated about the long-term impact on Rothwell's partnerships and market standing. Yet, amidst the condemnation, there was an undercurrent of sympathy. Social media was flooded with comments from people who recognized the courage it took to admit fault so openly. Some saw in Damien's apology a man grappling with his humanity, a flawed figure trying to make amends. Journalists debated the sincerity of his words, some praising the transparency while others doubted whether it was a calculated move to save face. But regardless of opinion, the apology marked a turning point. Damien had stripped away the mask of invincibility and revealed the man beneath, broken, repentant, and willing to face the consequences. As the press conference ended and the cameras dimmed, Damien stepped away from the podium, feeling the weight of what he had lost and what lay ahead. The path to redemption was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but for the first time, he embraced the possibility that ruin and renewal could coexist. And somewhere deep inside, a faint hope flickered that perhaps, in time, forgiveness could be earned. Eleanor found herself on a quiet stretch of coastline miles away from the relentless chaos of London's high society and corporate battles. The rhythmic crash of waves against weathered cliffs offered a balm her heart desperately needed, a steady, soothing reminder that life moved forward, indifferent to human pain and betrayal. She rented a small cottage overlooking the sea, its whitewashed walls and simple furnishings a sharp contrast to the opulence she'd left behind. Here, there were no whispers about scandals, no flashing cameras, no judgmental glances. Just the salty air, endless horizons, and the steady pulse of her unborn child within. Each morning, Eleanor woke before dawn and sat on the narrow porch with a leather-bound journal and a worn fountain pen. At first, the pages filled with fragmented thoughts, questions she dared not ask aloud, memories she couldn't escape, and the raw ache of heartbreak. But slowly, the act of writing became a ritual of reclaiming herself. She documented her fears and hopes, her anger and forgiveness, and, most importantly, the woman she was rediscovering beneath the layers of betrayal and hurt. She wrote about her past as an art curator, the dreams she had shelved for marriage, and the quiet strength she hadn't realized she possessed until it was tested. Through the ink, she reconnected with the identity she had almost lost, the woman who loved beauty, who believed in resilience, who was ready to build a new life on her own terms. The journal became her confidant, a witness to her transformation from a betrayed wife to a fierce, independent mother-to-be. In this coastal sanctuary, Eleanor also prepared for motherhood in a way she hadn't in the busy corridors of Rothwell Industries' social circles. She attended prenatal classes, learned soothing techniques to calm both herself and her baby, and filled her days with gentle walks along the beach, feeling the cool breeze and the sun warming her skin. Every kick from her child was a reminder that life, despite its hardships, was still a miracle worth embracing. By the time Eleanor returned to London, she carried with her more than just the memory of the sea. She carried a renewed sense of purpose and freedom, a readiness to face whatever lay ahead, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a woman who had reclaimed her power and prepared to write her own story. Chloe's world had unraveled faster than she ever imagined. After the public fallout, the cold reality of her choices settled in like a suffocating fog. Alone in her sleek London apartment, she stared at her phone, fingers trembling as she drafted message after message to Eleanor, texts filled with apologies, explanations, desperate pleas for a chance to talk. When the messages went unanswered, she turned to letters, pouring out her regret and sorrow in carefully penned words, hoping that distance might soften the wounds she'd inflicted. She left voicemails, her voice cracking under the weight of guilt, begging Eleanor to hear her, to understand. But it was more than just reaching out, it was about facing herself. The envy, the bitterness, the reckless hunger for a life she'd never earned, all of it had spiraled into a destructive force that hurt the one person she should have protected. One bleak morning, Chloe checked herself into therapy, acknowledging for the first time that her pain was deep-rooted and that healing wouldn't come from apologies alone. In sessions filled with tears and uncomfortable truths, she confronted the jealousy that had blinded her, the wounds from their fractured childhood, and the choices that had led her to betray her own sister. Weeks later, Eleanor received the final letter Chloe sent, a fragile olive branch written with raw honesty and a plea for understanding. Eleanor read the words slowly, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. The wounds were still fresh, and some betrayals ran too deep for quick healing. But knowing Chloe was seeking help, trying to confront her demons, brought a measure of peace Eleanor hadn't expected. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a faint hope that maybe, someday, the shattered pieces could be mended. For now, Eleanor chose to protect her own heart and the life she carried, leaving forgiveness for another day. 8 months later, the sterile hum of the hospital room was filled not with tension or heartbreak, but with the soft cries of new life. Eleanor held her newborn son, Henry James Rothwell, swaddled in a pale blue blanket, his tiny fingers curling instinctively around hers. The exhaustion etched on her face was softened by a radiant glow, a mixture of relief, hope, and an unspoken promise. Henry was more than just a child, he was a symbol of resilience, a beacon of new beginnings after months of pain and betrayal. The moment she looked into his wide, curious eyes, Eleanor felt a fierce protective love unlike anything she had ever known. Returning home, Eleanor decided to channel her energy into something meaningful beyond motherhood. Drawing on her past as an art curator and the profound journey she had endured, she founded a community art studio specifically designed for women recovering from betrayal, loss, and trauma. The studio was a bright, welcoming space filled with canvases, paintbrushes, and the scent of fresh flowers, a sanctuary where women could express their pain, their strength, and their healing through creativity. Workshops ranged from painting and sculpture to writing and collage, each session encouraging participants to tell their stories and reclaim their voices. Eleanor's work quickly gained attention. Stories of women transformed by art, finding solace and empowerment in the process, began to circulate in local papers and social media. She held exhibitions showcasing the powerful pieces created by the studio's participants, inspiring others who had felt isolated in their suffering. For Eleanor, this mission was more than just a business or hobby. It was a healing balm for her soul, a way to give back and to turn her darkest chapter into a source of light for others. Through this new purpose, Eleanor rediscovered herself. She was no longer just the betrayed wife or the pregnant woman scarred by deceit. She was a creator, a leader, a mother fiercely committed to building a future filled with hope. And with Henry sleeping peacefully in her arms, she finally felt whole again, ready to embrace whatever life had in store. Several weeks after Henry James Rothwell's birth, a gentle knock echoed through Eleanor's art studio. She glanced up from arranging paints on a shelf, her heart tightening at the unexpected visitor. Standing hesitantly in the doorway was Damien, his usual sharp edges softened by exhaustion and genuine vulnerability. Clutched carefully in his hands was a small wooden toy, a hand-carved airplane, simple but crafted with care. Eleanor recognized it immediately as something he must have made himself, a quiet token from a man trying to connect in a way words no longer could. Damien's eyes met hers, searching but not demanding. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, voice rough but steady. "I'm not here to ask for another chance. I just wanted to meet Henry." He took a slow step forward, the weight of regret evident in his every movement. To see him, to hold him, even if just for a moment. Eleanor felt a mix of emotions, a surge of old love, deep pain, and the fierce protectiveness that had grown around her son. She nodded, motioning toward a small corner of the studio where a cozy chair sat bathed in afternoon light. Damien approached cautiously, and when Henry stirred from his nap, the infant's tiny fingers curled instinctively around Damien's outstretched hand. The simple connection between father and son sparked something unspoken between Eleanor and Damien, something beyond words, beyond blame. For a few minutes, they shared a quiet, fragile moment. Damien spoke softly about hopes for Henry's future, about lessons he wanted to teach him, and about the mistakes he deeply regretted. Eleanor listened, her eyes steady but her heart guarded. She recognized the sincerity in his tone, but also knew that some wounds needed time to heal. The past could not be undone, but this moment was theirs to hold, a fragile thread woven between loss and hope. When the visit ended, Eleanor gently thanked Damien for coming, for the gift, and for honoring the son they shared. She watched as he left the studio, a man humbled but still present in their lives, however quietly. Turning back to Henry, Eleanor smiled softly, knowing that whatever the future held, she was ready to face it, strong, unbroken, and fiercely determined. "My dearest Henry. One day, you'll ask me about your father. You'll want to know who he was, what he meant to me, and why our family's story is tangled with both love and heartbreak. When that day comes, I'll tell you this: your father made mistakes, big ones, painful ones that shattered the world I thought I knew. But I made choices. Choices to stand tall, to protect you, and to find strength in the midst of that storm. As I watch you now, sleeping so peacefully in your crib, the sunlight spilling through the window and warming your soft skin, I feel a quiet pride swelling inside me. Not because life has been easy or because the wounds have fully healed. No, it's because I chose myself. I chose to rise above betrayal, to embrace hope, and to build a life defined not by others' actions but by my own courage and resilience. You are my miracle, my future, and my greatest teacher. Through you, I have learned that healing is possible, that even broken hearts can mend and grow stronger. I want you to know that your family's story is not just one of pain, but one of survival, love, and the power of choosing to move forward. There will be days when the past feels heavy, when the memories sting, but never forget this: your mother is fierce. I will fight for you, for your happiness, and for the life you deserve. And I promise to always be honest with you, to hold you close, and to nurture the light inside you. So rest now, little one. Dream without fear. And know that you are loved beyond measure, not for who came before you, but for the beautiful soul you are becoming. With all my heart. Mom.